Hi, my name is Heidi Onda, and I was diagnosed with stage 3A lung cancer in October of 2018, so 6 years ago. I'm a lifelong health enthusiast, health educator, and a fitness trainer, married to Pierre for 38 years, my high school sweetheart. He's a retired primary care physician. We have 3 adult children who are all independent. Throughout the United States they live. And we are now happily grandparents to 2 little girls, one from my son and daughter-in-law, one from my daughter and son-in-law. My lung cancer diagnosis was a complete shock. I didn't even have any symptoms that one would characterize as things you would look for lung cancer. I had an ovarian cyst that seemed a little suspicious just due to my age at the time, which was 55. And my doctor ordered a CT scan of my chest, abdomen, and pelvis, just wanting to rule out an ovarian cancer. And what came back, we were all stunned. The ovary actually looked like there was a benign ovarian cyst on it. Yes, unusual for my age, but what was really shocking was a mass was found in the upper lobe of my left lung and some lymph nodes in the middle of my chest that were characterized as plump. So we knew that things kind of needed to get checked further. And from there, I ended up having a PET scan, which those areas in my lung and my mediastinum lit up pretty bright. And that then led to a biopsy, which then led to a horrific phone call about 2 days later from a pulmonologist I had never met, never needed one, living, just a healthy lifestyle and being pretty athletic, never short of breath or anything, telling me that he had very bad news for me, that I had stage 3A adenocarcinoma of the lung. I was inoperable based on having multi-station disease, meaning the lymph nodes were in 2 different stations, and that the only treatment option I had was chemo radiation. And there you go. Go get your affairs in order. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing for many reasons. Primarily was, how could I have lung cancer? I didn't have what the risk factors were, taught to me. And I had no symptoms really. And how could this be late stage? And you're going to, most likely be gone in 4 to 6 months, get your affairs in order. I was just shocked. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't have a smoking history. In fact, I have to say that growing up in the 70s, everybody smoked. And I remember having to take a city bus to middle school, and all of my friends would move to the back of the bus and smoke. And I was the goody goody, and I sat right next to the driver pretty much in the front of the bus. And I felt stigmatized back then that all the cool kids smoked and participated in this very common behavior, even though they weren't old enough. It was the cool thing to do. And I was the kid who wasn't invited to birthday parties, never invited to hang out. And the irony is, all these years later, I'm the one with late stage lung cancer. And as far as I know, of the people I've kept in touch with, they do not have lung cancer or were ever diagnosed with lung cancer. So it just kind of shattered, I guess, a perception that I had of somebody who had lung cancer. And was also very embarrassed that as time went by and I learned more, that here I am, a health educator trained in prevention. My husband is a primary care physician trained in prevention. And if we didn't know that people without a smoking history could get lung cancer, why would we expect the general population to know that? And why should I get upset or feel defensive if somebody is going to ask me that, question? Wow, I didn't know you had a smoking history, or, oh gosh, you smoked, I didn't know that. And over time, I began to realize that these were teachable moments, and it was really important to educate people. If we weren't educated as people trained in prevention, the rest of the world was not either. And to this day, a lot of the the public health education that comes out of institutional messaging is still promoting that this is the way one gets lung cancer, instead of how a health educator has viewed it. That's the hat I wear. That with all cancers, we define prevention as let's catch it early, let's get you screened. And with lung cancer, we've defined it as don't smoke and this doesn't happen to you. So that has left up another major issue that my husband and I are passionate about, and that is screening promotion. People need to know that lung cancer screening exists. It's existed for a very long time, and only about 4.5% of the people who are eligible to get screened are getting screened. So why is that? Where is the public health awareness that screening exists? Why aren't the physicians who should be referring people out, generally primary care physicians, why aren't they, talking to their patients about this and getting them screened? So there are issues across the spectrum of lung cancer, all the way from prevention/early detection, screening, through research funding, lack of treatment options, to now survivorship issues. We are living longer, thank goodness. People need to know that there is hope. But with that, maybe we're having some long-term effects of some of the cancer treatments that we've had that we're grateful for, but will need to be addressed. Initially, with a cancer diagnosis, my head was just spinning. How could I have late stage any cancer and not feel sick? I mean, and then I'm being told I don't have much time. And the first thing that went through my mind is, knowing the stages of grief, I don't want to dwell too much in this denial space because I need to jump into treatment fast. If I only have 4 to 6 months to live, I want to make sure I get at least that amount of time. So, it was more about, okay, let's get a second opinion. Let's wait for biomarker testing to come back, which came back. I did not have any detectable mutations, not even the PD-L1. And the reason I'm sitting here in front of you today is because of research, and a new immunotherapy had been FDA approved just before I was diagnosed, which the pulmonologist who gave me the bad news over the phone had no knowledge of, but my oncologist did. And that immunotherapy had curative intent. So that allowed me to kind of sit back, make my bucket list, still be worried about, it not being successful, and wanting to live my life to the fullest. And that's what we would do. After I finished chemo radiation, I started immunotherapy, and the course of immunotherapy is an entire year. I was very focused on getting better, being compliant with all the treatments and things that I should do to maximize, the potential for this to be successful. And then a year had gone by, or more than a year, and I thought to myself, I haven't met another person with lung cancer. I mean, why do I feel alone? And the pandemic kind of changed that. We were all forced to be home, and there were some amazing efforts on the part of larger advocacy organization to put out like a link for meetups where people could meet. And I started meeting people there. I had met a couple of people in Colorado prior to that, and they were much younger than me. And these young people were putting themselves out there and trying to get media attention. And here I was sitting on this, a very quiet story that had been very, self-serving, that I wanted to get through treatment and focus on all of that and seeing my children. And I'm thinking about our story, health educator, primary care doc, no knowledge of this. And I started to feel like it was very irresponsible to stay quiet. And that was my first, thought. So basically around a year into this. And then, how did this very shy, introverted person end up sharing their story so loudly? That came later, almost another year later, when efforts across the country where we were going to these meetups. We were all advocates, survivors, their caregivers, getting the same type of treatment from from the asks that we would put out to our healthcare teams. What are you going to do for Lung Cancer Awareness Month? And basically the responses were either very dismissive, we'll get back to you, and they never did, ignoring our outreach, or in my case, this now came almost full circle to September of 2020, and I get an email telling me that, we have white lights in our parking lot that get turned on every night, and our doctors wear white coats. So we recognize lung cancer more than any of the other cancers. And I thought to myself, why was it okay to communicate with me like that, so disrespectfully, and so, in a humiliating manner, just because my cancer originated here in my lung? And that in that moment was when I snapped, and I turned into the person who is sitting here right now advocating a lot. I spend the majority of my waking hours advocating, and that's when that right ribbon was born. I screamed at Pierre to please make me a big white ribbon out of wood to throw on the front door, so I could at least get my neighborhood to understand that, hey, remember me? This is, Heidi, your local fitness trainer. Someone in this house has lung cancer, and guess what? It's me. And Pierre, it was the first time, I don't want to speak for his story, but what he shared with me is the first time he felt like he could actually do something to help me. And he came out in the garage with this. It was just wood. And then he had written like lung cancer awareness on it. And he said, I'm going to the hardware store. I'm going to paint it, get some white paint it white. I took a picture of this plain white ribbon. It had no text on it. And I sent it to my daughter, who is in marketing, and I asked her for like a recommendation for a stencil company. And she was like, no, I'll make you a label out of her little label machine. And so she did this thinking we were making one ribbon. In fact, when she printed it out, it wasn't even colored in black. She had to color it in with a Sharpie, and she's got a full-time job. And long story short, one picture went viral, and before we knew it, we were sending these to all 50 states, and with the help of industry, getting this to 36 countries. So it took a while, but once it happened and I snapped, this thing has exploded like wildfire. When I was first prescribed the treatment of chemoradiation, I do remember them telling me that I could have long-term effects down the road, specifically to my arteries around my heart were kind of where they were having to zap these lymph nodes. And, things could happen down the road, 5-6 years down the road. And I just filed that in the back of my head because I thought, I'm just hoping to get it 6 months here or a year. Just give me what you got. And so I remember hearing that. But throughout the course of my recovery, if you want to call it that way, my surveillance, when they go in and they do your scans, I went from 3-month scans to 4-month scans to 6-month scans, and everything was always fine. And no one was ever saying, gosh, maybe we should be following up since we know where you had radiation. And I was just feeling fine. And I'm back to teaching my exercise classes full throttle, high intensity interval training, leaving my 30-year-old clients in the dust and feeling fine. And then probably around June of 2024, so this past summer, I was going for a walk one day and I felt just a little tightness in my throat. And I came home and then I felt fine. And I run it past Pierre, my, now retired primary care doc husband. And he said, well, let me listen to your heart and all that. And he goes, do you still feel that now? No. And he goes, well, you know what? We have these wildfires and, maybe you're reacting to the smoke and, just kind of ease up on those outdoor walks. And so I didn't think much of it, started doing everything indoors, got a nice little air purifier. But when I would teach my class with my clients, when we did the cardio interval, sometimes I would feel that same sensation in my throat. And my husband would say, well, we're doing the best we can to clean the air, but there's probably still some smoke getting in here. We have to let we open the door, we let the dogs in and out and so forth. So never really chalked it up to anything. And then in August, I went to bed one night and I woke up in the middle of the night with that sensation. So here I am, I'm upstairs, I'm sleeping, I'm not exerting, and I feel this. And then I suddenly also feel like a pain, pressure in my jaw and my right arm. So typically people, when they have a heart attack, it's chest pain, it can be jaw pain, and generally left arm. But for me, I know my mother died of a silent heart attack 30 years ago. And back then they didn't call it that, but we know that heart attack symptoms in women can be different. And so that morning, and then I felt fine. I mean, it lasted about 5 minutes. It felt fine. The next day, I made an appointment to see my primary care. She was not available, so I saw her nurse practitioner, who actually did, quite a good workup at EKG right away. And Pierre's looking at this, and he's kind of tilting his head to the side. And I thought, oh boy, what? And I go, what's going on? He goes, well, it looks like you might have had an old heart attack. And I go, well, what does that mean? How old? He goes, it could have been last night. It could have been in June when you were walking and felt this for the first time. So I was then, referred to have a lot of blood work done and an echocardiogram and a stress test. And I wasn't in distress when I was at the doctor's office. I felt fine, but they were seeing this evidence of an old heart attack. I go home to make an appointment for the stress test. That's 5 months out. Couldn't get that. And then not the same thing, but 2 months out for the echo. And I was just getting really, irritated with that. And I pressed the refresh button, and suddenly there was an opening for the following morning. So I just left the house. I said to Pierre, I'm just going to go get my echo and I'll come back. And while I'm driving, this happens. And I was stuck in terrible traffic. I couldn't get off the highway. And I could watch the clock, though. And this episode, same thing, though, the tightness in the throat, the pain in the jaw, and the right arm lasted about 5 minutes. A cardiologist came in and he said, here's what I think's happening. For someone your age, I'm 61 years old now, we expect to find maybe 2 arteries that might have some plaques in them, and then you can benefit from a particular procedure and putting a stent in, and then there's some follow-up care, but and I'm very optimistic this is going to be a very good outcome for you. And as she's doing this, she says to me, did you ever have radiation to your chest? And I said, yes, I did. She wanted to know how long ago and if I knew the dosage. And I said, yes, 6 years ago, I had 66 grays of chest radiation for lung cancer. I've been contacting a lot of the oncologists, radiation oncologists, thoracic surgeons that I've met throughout my journey with the White Ribbon Project, letting them know what happened. And they were like, whoa, this is a new concern and survivorship that we are going to, and they were able to get me in front of a room of about 60 radiation oncologists from all over the world to share this. And it was amazing to see the amount of, I would say, maybe disappointment in themselves, and then a call to action. I let them know that they are very powerful in our treatment plans going down the road, because they know from the get-go that if we survive long enough, we'll most likely have some long-term effects of this. And if they could please communicate to our, whether it be our general oncologists or primary care physicians, to make sure we're getting some sort of cardiac surveilling. I don't know what it looks like. I think they have to figure it out, but we need to be on their radar. Anyone with lungs can get lung cancer, and no one deserves it. This has become, aside from raising our family, our life's work. It's important work. It's been in the shadows for way too long, which there's no excuse for it when it's the #1 cancer killer. That was what was one of the most outrageous things to me, that I didn't know that, and no one else seemed to care about that. We don't have an unrealistic expectation, but when we watch a community rise on its own and find its niche, It's so much bigger than ourselves. And we feel, or I can't speak for Pierre, but I feel, as hard as this is, so privileged to be part of this community. A piece of history in the making right now. This is the movement. This is the movement for lung cancer.